one of the worldwide leaders in the area of resilient computing, and he is very active in the circles of the IEEE and IPEP, and he always held leadership positions there. In 2004, he was the head of the flagship conference at the time, DSN, and he had the foresight to see that work in traditional resilience was getting a little bit stale, and he encouraged us to increase or widen the net of the work to start including resilience in the broadest terms, including security and mixing it with the reliability of the system. He is very well decorated. He's a fellow of the IEEE, and he has received too many awards to mention here. Today he's going to talk to us about how resilient computing interacts with cybersecurity. So without further ado, Professor Verissimo.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, and yeah, I'm okay. So it's a pleasure to be here, and actually an honor, and I hope that I will retribute by sharing with you a few thoughts about resilient computing after all these years, and actually after these initial strides to resilient computing, my group and others in the world, we continue trying to clarify and understand what is the body of knowledge. What would you, as a group, if you say you're resilient computing, what should you do? And so the first third will actually share the trajectory that I had in Luxembourg, because I used to be years ago in the University of Lisbon in Portugal. Now it's the 5th year, so I'll tell you what happened in essentially 4 years of research in Luxembourg, where the state of Luxembourg was generous enough to give me a big grant to develop resilient computing. And so I'll try to show that the bet that we had, so the strategy that we had, really bore fruit. And then the second third of my talk, I will spend it trying to explain exactly why we need resilient computing and what is resilient computing related to some techniques that come from dependability and security. And then in the last third, depending on time, I will show you some results that we have had, pointing to, this is all on the website of my group, which is called Critics. So first, just a quick introduction. University of Luxembourg is the only university in Luxembourg, and I come from one of its units that has faculty status. So, it sits together at the board of university management with other faculties. And actually, it's a center that does scholarly research, but is very connected to making this research go to practice. We have a partnership program, which is a lot of, almost 50 companies. And so we host, for example, industrial PhD the projects and postdocs that are doing things, of, research impact, but, in connection with industry. And of course, security and trust is a key element of what SNT is doing. And you can, I will not read it, but you can have a sneak peek. I mean, Luxembourg is a melting pot. So actually, in SNT, there are over 50 nationalities. We have 3 ERC advanced grants, and we have a nice turnover that is partly financed by the state, partly from competitive funds. These are the 10 groups of SNT, and this is my group. Now, this all started actually around those years, 2000, when me and other colleagues started, saying and testing the concept that the world is an immense, very complex, and largely interconnected infrastructure. And actually, this was strengthened by, I had a company in Portugal that would do, very, sophisticated high-level audits for governments and companies. And actually, also from the practice, especially of utilities, we understood that everything was connected, but people sometimes did not know it was connected, or how far, what was the reach of this connection. That I could, from my connected car, from my app, connect the oven in my house, and I said, wow, how cool, how modern I am. But then a hacker could also not only connect to the oven, but change the firmware and make the oven set fire to your house or something like that. And that I could also, from a smartphone, connect to a corporate network and then jump into the utility, the operational network, and then do something that is not interesting. And over this immense infrastructure, we have an incredible amount of data. This comes from the internet. Feel free to check. I mean, it's amazing. They keep updating this, but you can see the numbers. It's absolutely amazing. And so in our society, it depends more and more on this. And it has been always that, and each time more and more and more over the past more than 10 years. And despite of that, the vulnerabilities, the ones that are discovered, every year on commercial software, as you see here, ramped up, earlier on, and then they seem to stabilize. This is when I had my optimistic colleagues who don't work in dependability like, Mutaz and I work, saying, oh, cool, we're good. Now we only have 5,000 new vulnerabilities a year, which is still, incredible. And now they ramped up, and I'll let you guess why this happened, because of the smartphone ecosystem, which, as we know, is reasonably broken. Now, the other thing that I want to share with you is that the sophistication of attack tools started increasing ever since the 80s. In here, the tools were not very sophisticated, and actually you as a hacker had to be very, very good, like an engineer, because you could only hack something if you knew, how to work on a black screen or a blue screen. You have to be pretty good. And then the tools started having a lot of power, but the necessary expertise of the attacker went down. And this is where I've seen colleagues, very competent colleagues years ago, saying, oh yeah, we're cool, because now it's just script kits. And I told them that I would not be comfortable that a script kit could have access to an RPG launcher, a bazooka, but I would not be comfortable if, I could do very specialized teams that years ago in normal kinds of black ops, would only be reserved to nation states, and now any reasonable power, meaning a company or whatever, can ambition to have war-grade weapons in the cyberspace. This is very worrying, and I don't want to scare you, but this is the status quo. We have an immense interconnected infrastructure. There is pressure to be online, of course, we all know that, so we depend a lot on this infrastructure. The infrastructure has vulnerability, and there are power adversarial actors, sophisticated exploit tools, and of course the accidental threats. So you see the risk, if some of you do risk analysis like I do, is elevated. And the balance between these things on the dishes, the vulnerabilities, the threats, the dependence has been lost. Of course, this is amplified threat surface, so it's good news for people working on security, dependability, or even better, and I'll try to convince you, people working on resilience. So why do we need resilient computing? Think about this. The system complexity reached the point where you can no longer, generically speaking, of course, systems of a certain scale, go as you used to go in design and exploitation of systems. You cannot take as a given that you can achieve a prioristic zero defect objective, if that ever happens. And you can no longer have static architecture configurations. Forget it. You can no longer design in the usual way that I've done dozens of papers, Mutaz, Marco, etc. That system model, blah, assumptions, blah, architecture, that, and then we do something, we test it or we prove it, and we ship it, and it keeps working for years. No. The minute you put such systems there, maybe the landscape has changed. And we have to know how to live with that, and we have to research how to build systems that mimic this, generic definition of resilience. The property of resuming original shape or position after being bent, stretched, or compressed, elasticity, plasticity. Now, can this happen? Well, I can only tell you that a dear friend of ours, very experienced, very famous professor, Brian Randall, the first time I mentioned my ideas about this, there was still very far-fetched thoughts, okay? It was maybe in 2002. And when I said something about that, systems whose architecture we might not even know what it looks like, he said, are you nuts? Are you nuts? How can you then, design a dependable system in the old criteria? So I'll just show you later on what we have achieved, and we, meaning my group and other groups in the world, by persisting on finding solutions there. Before that, let me try to revisit the classical protection set of techniques, and let me use security because it's harsh, we know that. It's harsher than dependability. Dependability, our adversary is Mother Nature, and insecurity is human minds. And so this was crafted some years ago, the AVI fault model. We tried to understand what was the process of failure from the security viewpoint using concepts from dependability. And so all starts by a primordial fault, a vulnerability. There's something wrong there, be it hardware, software, configuration, etc. And then it stays there, and actually nothing will happen. This is very important to understand. A system can stay vulnerable forever. Now, to become dangerous, it has to be attacked. There has to be something that activates this vulnerability. And then, yes, you have an intrusion. An intrusion is, in dependability lingo, a fault. But the intrusion, if you don't do anything, gives an error in the state of the system. Something is wrong. For example, a secret file is now open or whatever. And then, failure will ensue sooner or later. So this is where we started to get us constructive about, enhancing the protection techniques from the classical security viewpoint. Classical security viewpoint is intrusion prevention. If you think about the body of knowledge of security, and well, of course, it's vulnerability prevention. You have to design with rigorous methods so that the code is correct at first start. But then for complex code bases, this could be more difficult. So you do vulnerability removal. You verify the software. You find bugs. You test. You find bugs. You correct the bug, and so on and so forth. And on the attack level, you prevent attacks, firewalls. And you see, having this decoupled view helped, now, of course, we're almost in 2020. We know that it helped a lot of designers to understand better what are the mechanisms of failure from the security viewpoint. However, whatever you do in a decently complex system will not be enough. We know that. And so intrusion prevention is very important, but suffices one whole. And what is the problem? The problem is that anything with probability of failure of 0.00 blah, blah, blah is reasonable in terms of robustness for accidental faults. For malicious intentional faults, it takes reachability and discovery. So if an attacker knows the fault is there and it can reach the point of activation, it will attack the fault. So this is really not enough. And so, of course, we have systems, and we do transactions and all that. So, of course, what is the panorama? Well, because we are adaptive, and so we humans created intrusion detection. We said, okay, yeah, that's true. So in case something goes wrong, let's detect it. And then intrusion detection is also very useful. We cannot live without it in current industry, level in these days. But it may be incomplete, as we know. It may not detect all the problems, and it will be slow in the days of today. And those of you who know about intrusion detection, you know how hard it has been to cope, for example, with carrier-grade intrusion detection. I mean, we had to go to very sophisticated hardware and so on and so forth. But let me tell you, we are working with autonomous cars. And I mean, intrusion detection is not going to work to solve the problem that, makes you not miss the bend down, down there's a bend to the right, and you have an intrusion, what do you do? So actually, we need to go further from this. Now, think about this. We are here, right? We are here. And so we are almost failing, but we now decouple the process of failure. It's not atomic. If you ever thought, oh, ping, it failed. Oh, ping, I was attacked. No. There was a vulnerability, there was an attack, there was an intrusion, there's an error, and then here, if we don't do anything, we'll fail. So, some of us thought, hey, why don't we use the same principle, fault tolerance, like we have in planes and sorry, and on trains and all that, and start thinking about intrusion tolerance, fault and intrusion tolerance. So we would kill two rabbits with one stone. And this is an effort that really pumped up. The concept was discovered previously, But it stayed dormant, maybe because, things were not ready yet. But from in the 2000s decade, there were two big projects, one in Europe called MAFTIA, and the other in the US called OASIS, there were dozens of researchers, trying to develop these concepts. It was much harder than it looked, but actually now we have maybe hundreds of papers in the area. And so, the very appealing thing, think about this, is that it's no longer about the Security Operations Center and the System Security Officer looking at things, red, what do we do, and so on and so forth. If this works, it's automatic, like you have, in the plane. The controls are automatic. Things fail, components fail, but, the plane's still, I'm not talking about the Boeing Max. But anyway, so they continue operating. All right, so this started creating in some of us this what is resilience? So what are the major concepts? What are the mantra? What is the mantra of resilience? And actually, in a nutshell, it's this. It's a comprehensive approach to all these threats from first principles. So we have to think that the systems must be endowed with at least some capacity of surviving. You cannot say, I'm selling T-shirts, so I don't care. No, you should start, you should not bolt it on. You should build it in. And it's got to be accidental and malicious faults. Because some of us, knew already that some techniques of dependability conflicted with security and vice versa. And so, you want to provide protection in an incremental way. You cannot, sell a system that pays the price of outer security, and then the customer says, oh, but, I don't need all that. And you see, fault tolerance is great because it's parametric. It's based on this number of faults. And then if ever someone tells you, F equals 3, F equals 3 is not, the threats are very high. Okay, let's adapt the system, let's make it 5. So you see, it's parametric. This is very important. And then automatically adapt this parameterization to a dynamic set of threats. This is state-of-the-art research. I'm actually starting now a project with some other colleagues in Europe about that. It's called threat adapt, right? But seeking unattended and perpetual operation, what is this? Well, the system must work forever. Sounds funny, but that's exactly, or you call it sustainability. So, because this is, if you fulfill all these things, that's resilience. So, you could ask, that sounds complicated. Why don't we get to the old times of security and intrusion prevention, intrusion detection? Well, some of us had even a network of excellence in Europe talking about these things. There's a large body of research that showed that some colleagues are modeling people, and they show we really have to get there. But why don't I leave you with Admiral Rogers? Until recently, the head of NSA and the head of US Cyber Command, because they compact cyber defense and cyber security. And he was saying, well, it's better to be focusing on resilience rather than on prevention. And he's not a researcher. He's a guy who solves things for yesterday. And he said this, I think, in September 14, which is, I loved it because this is when I arrived at Luxembourg to build this resilience computing project. So I always kept this in my mind. All right, so, just quickly, because I will be sending the slides. We have written textbooks about this, but actually this is the mantra. I think you get it. So, preventing and tolerating faults and intrusions, handling incremental threat severity, resisting continuous threats, and validating your assumptions. There's nothing more stupid than stupid assumptions behind a great theory paper, because the theory is all nice and you prove the theorem, but the assumptions are not the right ones. All right, so this is the basics, and this is what was done since 2000 to early, 2012, something like that. And so let me share now, how this worked. This tolerance goal, I think now you captured more or less the idea, is that something should operate correctly as long as at most F faults of any quality occur, meaning arbitrary or of some quality. I mean, if you constrain the way the system components can fail. So, I won't let you read this, but essentially this is how we would write it in a more formal way. You have a set age of assumptions, and then you have a model, and then a system running this algorithm A is fault tolerant, fault and intrusion tolerant, if and only if at least n minus f good components stay operating during its lifetime. And then it fulfills whatever safety and liveness properties you define. So this is an important thing for the next slide. At least n minus f. N is the number of processes in the system, and f is the maximum number of compromise units. Now you understand. If you guarantee that the minimum number of correct processes exist, continue, you're good. All right, so how does it happen? For those of you, of course, several of you will not be so aware about fault tolerance. Well, it happens like this. You, in modular and distributed fault tolerance, which is, actually spawned by this project Delta4, you replicate software components in several machines in the distributed system, and then you do things, algorithms with these replicas, the A replicas. You do algorithms that could, voting or getting responses from the single that is left alive and so on and so forth. And hopefully, this will let you, now you understand, automatically, resist to problems in some components because there's, a majority that is good. It's like this. You have these nodes and they can suffer accidental faults or they can be attacked. But what is imperative is that all these nodes have the chance of getting the right information. This is a crucial rule. Oh, but that guy is a bad guy. It doesn't matter. We don't know. We are having God's view now. So we just send everything to all these guys and let them do stuff which actually will probably mean this. The second node will do something wrong. But then you have a comparison. And since you have a comparison, you get to the right decision. And of course, you all had the feeling that this is about what people do. For example, in the jets, the flaps, for example, there's a unit that is triplicated in hardware called TMR, triple module redundancy. You had this idea there, it makes sense, yeah. Yes, but you see, when you go to a network of computers and these guys are separated across a network, it gets a little bit more complicated. And actually, it gets even more complicated if your problem is with malicious perpetrators, guys that can attack the network and the nodes. And getting this green result may imply a fairly complex algorithm, and I'm sure you heard about this BFT, Byzantine fault tolerance. That's the first, working, practical protocol in BFT, crafted by Miguel Castro and Bob Liskov. But then over the years, people came up with simplifications, and actually, currently, this is maybe the state-of-the-art MinBFT, which using trusted components gets to a much, simpler thing. But this is what we do. But it may be complex, but what we get, remember, is that despite whatever happens, whatever a hacker does, we don't care, we keep operating. As long as it does not hurt more than F units. All right. And the beautiful thing about security, not for hardware faults, for software faults, is that actually you can make all this happen in a single machine, and then communication gets much simpler. Because think about this. If it's not about the machine failing, if it's about software problems, you could use virtual machines and then put them, voting, receiving this amplified input and voting there. And this was the subject of several papers, and very interesting papers, because then you don't have this expenditure of going across the network. Okay, so we're here. Yes, you see, I come from engineering. I'm a computer science that was fortunate enough to have an engineering degree. We're talking about that. And the insight on systems that gave me is absolutely amazing. And I still remember a professor who said, all that works fails, whatever you do. The only way of making a computer system not fail is not to connect it, just leave it there. So even intrusion tolerance, however beautiful and appealing is, will have a problem, which is there may be common mode failures. The hacker, this defect exists in all the replicas, so he attacks all the replicas at the same time. Or the replicas are not so resilient themselves, so robust, meaning that he will attack the replicas so fast that the n minus f thing went, he got to f plus 1 too quickly. Yes, it's true. And then what happened? In the middle of the 2000s decade, we meaning all these dozens of people in Europe and in America, Oasis, Mafia, including my group, we were so happy, we are doing these BFT protocols. Wow, they're super good, right? And one day, I always like to challenge myself. This is what I teach my people. You have to be your fiercest self-critic, so you have to self-criticize. And I was saying, what are we doing? What if F+1 faults happen? We never asked this question. You know, we are so happy whilst N minus F guys, etc., and we never discuss what may happen if the hacker is stronger than us. And I remember that in a DAX 2 seminar, so these are very secluded seminars that are organized in Germany with some thematic things, and this was about these distributed protocols. A lot of people whom we know down there, but some of them this more pure, I would say more the mathematical background people. It's not the theory. I do system theory, and I do some algorithms theory. But we're talking about people who see the algorithm, right? And when I put this, you know what, they told me, what are you talking about? I don't care. It's an hypothesis. And then I do my theorem, and I prove the theorem, and I'm good, you know? And I say, no, it's not going to be enough. And then this kept us working, and other people as well. And actually, this was the problem. You know, any system that is working will fail, and we have to do something about it. So this brought in resilience, actually. You know, keeping one of the arms of resilience was keeping the system working forever. And so it's more or less this. Given this previous fault and intrusion tolerant system, with now our processes is resilient if and only if, given a set of HR assumptions, there is an FR that for the lifetime of S, there is always at least N minus FR, NR minus FR correct process. What does this mean? This means that now I relook at my system, I admit that I have to create some stronger assumptions by means of having some trusted component, for example. I admit that I have to modify maybe more N, you know, and maybe a smaller F but I gain that the system lives forever. And this is what then put, you know, some of us working. And there are results about these things like, you know, self-healing, you know, reactive, proactive recovery, and so on and so forth. So essentially, what would happen is that we would perform what dependability faults call fault treatment. So the system now, imagine this. So there's this set of replicas, and the hacker attacks one replica. So assume that we have F equal 2. So he attacks one replica. And now he's starting to attack the other replica. And if he attacks the other replica, he has F equal 2. And then if he attacks the third replica, then we are done, right? Now imagine that whilst he's very active trying to penetrate the third replica, we recover these replicas. We bring down the replicas and renew them with new software. And then the hacker hacked the third replica and turns back to, what happened? It got to 0. So that's more or less this mentality of self-healing. All right, so what then we started thinking, I was still in Lisboa, it could be, you know, 2012. What are the next steps? And actually, the plan I did then was actually about what is resilient computing really. This is what I then later brought to Luxembourg. And actually, I spent the first year hiring people, and then when I had enough guys, and actually the first batch was postdoctoral guys, and we started thinking, what is resilience? And so sharing quickly with you what took us, you know, some time was we said, okay, so resilience, the objective is to come up with a body of knowledge that puts us in the way of doing fault and intrusion tolerant, dynamic, adaptive, unattended, perpetually operating common systems. And we set down what are the enabling techniques that we should master. Techniques in terms of mental techniques, you know. What are the enabling mental techniques? And actually we started with a dozen of them, and we shrank them down. And actually, we organized them in 4 research lines in my group, which would be hybridization-aware algorithms. I'm going to explain. But you see, this is something that was started, an idea that started already quite a few years ago. And it's progressively being followed by more and more authors. It's like this. You don't consider that the whole system is very strong or very weak. You consider that the system has better parts and not so good parts, and then you create the computational model to make you enjoy that. And some of the very good parts would be this ultra-reliable, trusted components. And so this is the other research line. But you see, if you say something, look, if you ever write a paper saying, I design an ultra-reliable trusted component, and then you go about blah, 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 algorithm, blah, 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 I'll reject the paper. If it doesn't have a serious validation section, I'll say, what are you talking about? You designed a trusted component. If it's ultra-reliable, I want to see figures like 0.9999, how many nines, right? And so we had to work there. This is what we call high-confidence virtual verification of mid-size software. And I'll be giving you some examples of how far we went. And then, this infrastructure operates on data. And so, yeah, you have to go upstairs and look about privacy and integrity preserving decentralized data processing. And this is what we've done over 3 years, full years of research, because I'm giving you an account of the status quo in beginning this year. The first year I was hiring, and so it's 3 years, overall 4 years. And actually, we had promised ourselves that we would do projects by thinking where they drew from and where they could give outputs. And we promised ourselves that we should not diversify too much. And this was crucial for what I'm going to show you, the amount of results that we had. So this means that whenever it could be me, I would come, oh, I had this great idea, but actually it doesn't fit any of the enabling techniques. Should we, blah? And we said, no, let's not do it. Let's write it down, and maybe, in some time we're going to do it. And actually, by doing that, we traveled quite interesting roads. So let me share a little bit. Ultra-resilient minimal roots of trust and enclaves. So people talk about trusted components. They talk about trusted components all the time. People talk about trusted third parties. But actually, for example, the banks tell, well, I have a trusted third party. If I ask them, why should I trust you? Because we're a bank. That's no kind of evidence, right? And so we thought, no, it's not the way to go. And everything we have been doing over the past years talked about trusted, trustworthy components. Trusted, trustworthy components, we started on purpose using that, apparently redundant sentence, but it's not. If you come from dependability, you understand that what dependability folks do is trustworthiness, what security guys do is trust, and then we have to bring it together, trust and trustworthy. That was crucial to make us understand how far we had to go in terms of verifying those components, but also that, because TPM, for example, from TCG, is a trusted, trustworthy component. If you go check, what is behind the chip, there's a lot of verification, there's a lot of validation. Yes, it's trusted, trustworthy. But the interface is very constrained. The architecture of that chip is very constrained. For example, some of you, I'm sure know it's very slow. For reasons, it's not because, for reasons, specific reasons. And so we found out that we needed a computational model, a serious computational model to make us enjoy this hybrids, let them call them. And so this is the other research line. And actually, we are just leveraging the fact that there are these hardened components down there. And so we run algorithms, for example, those kinds of algorithms like VFT, but we can enjoy these trusted components once in a while when we need. And this is actually the simplified other algorithm that I just showed you, the sneak peek, the min-VFT. But for example, this interface has to be formally verified. And actually, nobody had done it before. We have been saying in things that we wrote that it's not just you put a chip there and, okay, you call it. It's got to be, you have to have the most, secure, you have to be sure about getting the properties of the chip whenever you want them, and I'll get there in moments what does mean. But if you design with that, chances are that these hybridization-aware distributed algorithms can really promote resilience. Look, it's a concept that has been around for some years, but you will recognize some of these names, so it's being used and used more. The other day we located, besides our papers, we located 43 papers from other colleagues in the world using hybridization. Now, what are we doing in this ultra-resilient minimal roots of trust? We went down one floor because we had some prototypes of macroscopic trusted components, blah, blah, blah. And now other colleagues, for example, IBM Zurich had prototypes with FPGAs later on, inspired on exactly this MinBFT protocol and they did, a better protocol. And we are now looking at many cores. And many cores are multiprocessors. They are a single point of failure, meaning that when something fails inside a chip, there's no protection, and then an attacker can then make the whole chip fail. And what we are studying is this little thing here, which is a little hardware blob there, which if we install in the tile to network on chip, we can transform it into a distributed system. I don't know. Think about this. Inside a chip, you have a distributed system. So all the techniques, basically, for example, for fault tolerance, it can be used inside the chip. So you end up with a correct chip until it fails by hardware, of course. I mentioned that verification is very important. So what we're doing with this, with pieces of the higher level protocols, but certainly with the trusted components we want ultra reliable, we're using theorem proving. And theorem proving is, I'm sure you would agree, currently the strongest tool to get you to make assertions about the correctness of a piece of software or system. We're using theorem proving, using the COC suite. And actually we have two papers. So you see this paper does the first verification of the implementation of this PBFT, this early protocol. And as following, very recent, does the verification of this MinBFT with hybridization. And you know what? It's already, I mean, it's published. But you know what? There's a property that we defined that the reviewers found very interesting. It's called lifting. We explained that you have to make very rigorous statements about a thing that you would think trivial, which is I do a call to a chip and I got a response, a signature or whatever. It doesn't work like that. If you are in a very harsh threat model, you have to give very strong assumptions. And so that's what I was talking about. Now, in the privacy and integrity, the preserving decentralized data processing, we have been working on two fronts, biomedical and blockchain, right? It's very hypey, but it was not because of that we went there. In the biomedical area, what we have been looking at is that there is, and so for those of you who will be interested, I'll be talking much more about this tomorrow. I'm going to give a talk on, digital health. But since I've been talking with so many people since 2009, I was still in Portugal. I and colleagues set up a project at that time, colleagues from KTH, Stockholm, and then other life sciences colleagues, because there are two things you could not do, and this is what half was doing something and the others were doing the other thing. You cannot say that, oh, no, it's cool, now genomes, I mean, medical analysis, now cool, I mean, I can put it on the cloud and I do, alignment and all that. That's a crime, actually. I mean, and thank God GDPR, is creating some light that is very serious. But you see, this is what the life sciences people need. Imagine that some of you who do experimental science, I came here and say, hey, the data set, you cannot use them anymore. And I say, hey, how do I do my papers? And so you can also not say that you cannot use that. So we got together this group of people. I have fantastic memories of this project called BBC, not BBC Radio, but Biobank Cloud, with people as good as Karolinska in Charité Hospital and Humboldt. I mean, this guy, and we learned a lot with each other. The computer scientists, now you see KTH, Stockholm, and us. And actually, at that time, we said, okay, so we have to create very powerful algorithms that don't exist yet, that automatically take out, and we focus on genomes because they're the most really critical. We take out the sensitive parts automatically and then continue with the workflow. And I'm going to talk then about, there's more to it, but stay tuned, see me tomorrow and I'll explain. Now, the other blockchain. What happened? I was really not going into blockchain for the reasons I told you. We cannot diversify too much, otherwise we disperse. But you know, at a certain point, I got very attractive because I was hearing things that look, wow, this looks like a case for a Byzantine resilient distributed database, which is the blockchain. And so I read this paper, this guy, Satoshi Nakamoto, and I decided to enter there. And so actually, because I said, we could do stuff. I mean, I'm not an expert here, but I hired the guy who was, you know, an expert. I mean, he had knowledge in blockchain. And actually, I thought that we could do something. And actually, what happened? Okay, I think I'll have time to, yes. And I'll show in minutes what we achieved. So, after these 3 useful years of research, we actually could do a lot of projects. We were surprised when I was cooking up this slide for my, you know, scientific advisory board in last February. I was surprised. We actually could do all these things. And you, of course, yeah, you say, okay, yeah, you did things, but what happened? Well, we could have results in 4 application areas, which is also something that is very important and is not obvious. If you are doing stuff, you know, you have an algorithm, etc., or a principle, and then apply it to several areas, it's not obvious. So in the Internet Cloud Complex, we created an architecture that is the first, you know, global overlay. It's the security architecture for SDN called Anchor, and then a protocol for communication that is that is distribution less per message generation. Means that you don't have to distribute keys, you don't have to run protocols to distribute keys. So and it outperforms OpenSSL by 30%. The architecture is a nice concept because it recovers the principle of SDN, which is logical centralization, but now logical centralization of non-functional properties. For the autonomous vehicles area, which is very happy, and we're having a lot of fun there, years ago we came up with the first comprehensive study of the threat plane of the autonomous vehicles ecosystem. And this was very helpful for us, for other colleagues, because this is when we had already 2 dozens of these hacking papers, hacking the Chrysler, hacking the Blah, hacking, etc. And then we tried to make sense of what are the agents, what are the threat vectors, what are the mechanisms, and so on and so forth. And then Arctivis Cast, and I'll still have time, I'll show you, but it's the first Byzantine resilient, real-time, reliable broadcast protocol. Until now, it's like this. Either you do real-time or you do security. You don't do both because, you know, the attacker attacks your time base and then screws up the real-time. So there was a problem there, and we came up with the first protocol there. The e-health part, I'm going to talk about it tomorrow, but the second thing besides this filtering is a high-yield DNA alignment protocol. So we do a miracle. We take the nucleotides and these base pairs are the things that compose this double helix. And so we excise, like, you know, a scalpel, we excise the sensitive sequences, which, because we have safety bands, goes to a good 15% of the genome, and we can still align it with 1% less success rate than the best alignment protocol on the clear that does not protect the genome. And RepliCoin, so we came up, I'm sure that, you know, this is hype. So in blockchain, you heard that this blockchain thing, Bitcoin, etc., these proof of work systems, they work if the attackers have less than 50% computational power. And we came up with an algorithm exactly combining these notions, you know, resilience, right? We came up with an algorithm that resists way more than 51%. In certain conditions, it can resist an attacker that has 80% of the computational power of the network, and we continue working. Sounds fun, but yeah, we did it. All right, so now in the rest of the time I have, so I promised to finish at 5 to 12, is that it? 10 to. It will work. It will work. Yes, exactly. It will work. So this is the SDN architecture. I will not go with a lot of detail there, but anyway, for those interested in the slides, I point to the papers. So this is the ecosystem of the threat plane of the vehicle ecosystem. We had a lot of fun writing this paper. It's, you see, it's not a rocket science paper. You understand? It's just aligning the things, making some deductions about what happens. But we had a lot of fun, and we have seen that it's useful. But you see, it led us to something that we have been saying since. We see it now said by many more people, which is great. We talked about the safety security gap. And we know in our community, the dependability community, people do safety cases. We know a lot of very good people who do that. And in the end, they can say, well, there's an infinitesimal probability, like 0.000, of something catastrophic happening, but it's acceptable because it's infinitesimal. 10 to the minus 9 failures per hour, this kind of thing. You can no longer do that with malicious faults because hackers don't like stochastics. They will make it happen. So this is what it's not they will lead to a problem. Okay, so this RTBIS cast, just quickly, we are now working on the upper layer, and we want to get to a real-time Byzantine atomic broadcast. You know why? And this is a project with Intel. We want to create scenes in your car that don't look like the Uber scene they give you on your smartphone, where the Uber says it's here, and then 2 minutes later it pull back, and then No, we want to have something that is really accurate and gives you, because this is very instrumental for, autonomous car vehicles, ecosystems in open systems, in open roads, metropolitan roads and all that. All right, so now, this I'll be talking tomorrow, so I think that I'll jump. So you see, when we started, we were looking at Bitcoin, and we learned about how you can bring something in from BFT knowledge, and Bitcoin NG from Cornell and Bitcoin from EPFL were very inspiring. And actually, until Repucoin, Bitcoin would be the leader of the state of the art, which would, fight some attacks, but still would be sensitive to some of them and would have much better performance than Bitcoin. And of course, we enjoyed, reading this, and of course, you build on other people's shoulders. So actually, we're happy to have now the protocol that is resilient to all the attacks known. Has, this is single-threaded, no sharding yet, right? 10,000 TPS. And that's, as I told you, it's due to the fact as well that it resists enormous attack factors in terms of computational power. So this is my group because we are very focused. It's not that I wanted to do it, but I can call a guy at 3 in the morning. I mean, he's sleeping, and I wake him up because I was in another part of the world. And I say, man, Jean, there's a problem in the paper that we have to submit tomorrow. And I say, yeah, yes, but we also like to have fun, like hell. And I think that's the good, the good combination in top-level research is like sports. You train, you suffer, you play, and then you have fun. Go for beers and all that. So thank you very much. And I'll take questions. Yes? Fantastic. Do you want to work for me? I mean, so this is what we're doing now. So the question is, for those who didn't hear, you have this n minus f, and you are considering that everybody is equal. Should you not consider that everybody is equal, and then give different importance to different players? This is what we do in Repucoin already. Repucoin is about reputation, but reputation as a differential equation, not social media stuff. It's a differential equation that computes, your reputation in terms of your capacity of doing legal work over the time. And then we have a weighted voting. So this voting, we give it weights. Very good. And Threat Adapt, this project we're starting now, is going to pull this to higher levels and generalize. Thank you for the question. One more question? Or two, or whatever, I don't bite, so you can. Yes? Of the? Ah, yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank God I also have an answer for it. I might not, right? But yeah, and actually let me go back because, so this is called subversion in security lingo, and this is what certain nation states do to the other nation states, right? They put stuff in the chip that we thought worked well. So there's no bulletproof way of handling that, we know, because we know of things that were so well disguised that it was not, you could not discover it. And especially because some hardware is proprietary, it's sold as a black box and blah. So one of the things we want to do addresses that point. And this is one of the things that the Intel people have liked for obvious reasons, which is you have a many tile thing. So now these are tiles. Imagine there's a boundary here. And so these are tiles. So imagine these are machines, right? And then imagine that you can have 2 Intel tiles and 3 AMD tiles and blah, 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 and 3 ARMs and all that. And then you can have a special tile with A6 from this integrator that you need but you don't trust, and so on and so forth. And then inside this chip, you run those voting algorithms to follow what the chip is doing. Now you get it, right? Because we don't know if the chip was subverted, but the minute the chip starts doing bad things, we'll know because we are voting on the actions of. This is modernistic thing, but this is what we are trying to do with Intel. Yeah. One more question? Yes?
Can you comment more specific? Situation and
yes.
that technology
Yeah.
to that if there's actually.
So if you want, okay, what you want to comment, to comment is a political thing. And I think that all that, from what we know, and we discussed it with, I'm sure you know that some things appeared on web, some photographs of components, blah, 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 right? I guess you know, that's what you're talking about. That is nothing. I had it analyzed by my group. We have some guys who really work at this level of hardware, FPGAs and ASICs. That is nothing. That is just, yeah. And then we checked with other colleagues. So it's commercial war. So, and actually in my country, I used to have a lot of contacts in my country, with centers. I'm a member of the scientific advisory board of the cybersecurity, National Cybersecurity Center, and I used to have contacts with the services and all that. And I can tell that, Huawei people visited Portugal recently. They were very well welcomed by the higher education and research minister and so on and so forth. And then I asked, were there any problems? They said no. So, it's largely commercial. But this doesn't mean, then the other question is that, no, whatever they may be doing, everybody else is doing. So, this is why I think that we have really to come up with something that integrates, even if Intel didn't want to follow this, if you put this on the market, then integrate fabs, guys who integrate chips, right? None of the big manufacturers, they could then do ultra resilient, compounds, chips with a lot of cores to do whatever is necessary.
Okay, well, it's about time. On behalf of KAUST, thank you very much.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.